This is kind of like a strap in and listen, because this is kind of one of those big parts of the Bible. So if you don't believe that he was a complete lunatic, and you don't believe that he was just BSing his way through life, the only option is that he is who he says he was. There aren't any alternatives here. You can be as stubborn and obstinate as you like, but the reality is Jesus is who he says he was, and we need to come into alignment with his preaching, his teaching. Welcome to the Bible in 1 Year podcast, brought to you by two Brits and aBible.
Today is day 294, covering Mark 14. Right, Mark 14.
Marky 14, yes, just 14. So again, some of the same sort of stories and sections of the Bible, so trying to find a different spin on it. Here, we were talking last time about the lady that anointed Jesus's feet with the very expensive perfume, and how actually the disciples are fairly justified, so this is better off going to the poor. But in here, it's interesting because it's straight after this that Judas Iscariot went off to the chief priests to betray Jesus. And I remember hearing once, it's sort of funny how those things just suddenly clicked from like, oh, interesting, that actually in Judas's mind, he actually cared more about the money side of things. Even though Jesus was saying like what he said, and the point being very true, Judas was focused so much more on the money that was almost the thing that sort of like tipped him over the edge of saying, well, you know what, that's it, that's the last straw for me, I can't follow this guy. And that's when he went. So yeah, it's kind of just a little point in there.
Yeah, that's interesting, because Jesus talks about you can't be a servant to two masters, and he specifically references mammon, which is the love of money, worship of money, right? So very, very interesting. Yeah, great stuff, man. My first point is 14:24. I guess I'll go with that, and then you can step back a couple verses. But so this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many, he said to them. So, you know, remember that a big part of Jesus's new covenant is through communion. And so I used to be at a church that did that every week. I miss doing that every week. We do it about once every month now.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is, at least from personal experience, I would say it's an important part of my faith and my walk. So whether you're doing communion a lot at the moment, whether you've never done communion, whoever it is that's out there, I would just say, once you believe in Christ, do it when you can. And it really is an amazing tool, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Closer to Jesus.
Yeah, for just that sort of bringing yourself back to that place of realization and thankfulness and sort of humility. It's a great way of doing it, and there's nothing to stop you from doing it by yourself as well, just at home with family or friends or whatever. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah.
Or just on your own, just have a half a loaf of bread and a bottle of wine, and not actually advocating for that. Do not do that, ideally.
Good disclaimer there. Yeah, you wouldn't want that much bread. Yeah, I'm going to step back just because I just love this little section here. A non-point really, but in 14:14, I also had 12:12, so it's nice to have 14:14.
Nice.
It's Jesus on here telling his followers to go ahead of him to set up for the Last Supper, and he's basically saying, go into the city, you'll see a man carrying a jar of water, follow him. Say to the owner of the house, teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat? He doesn't say, is there one here? He's saying like, where's the guest room? It's just such a ballsy request. But I guess when you're Jesus and you know what's going to happen, sometimes you can just be like, I can't be bothered with the small talk here. Where's the guest room? We need to set up.
I love that. That's so cool. Again, sometimes it's those little details, right? That's awesome, dude.
Absolutely.
Really cool.
You're up next on 37, I think.
Yep, so 14:37. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Simon, he said to Peter, you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for one more hour? It's really interesting that obviously Jesus is the one that calls Simon Peter, but here he's calling Peter by his name, Simon. He calls him by his real name, not the name that he gave him in this moment. And I'm not, quite sure why he does that, but all I can say is, in this moment, Simon Peter is not really doing what Jesus wants him to do, right? And this is a low moment. So I think there's something there. I'm not really sure what. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like right now you're not living in your calling, effectively. Right. You are Peter, but right now you're being Simon very much. Right. So yeah, kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I like that. Kind of, yeah, feeds into my next point, which was in the next verse, which is saying, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again, it's what we've talked about previously of sort of guarding your heart by guiding your feet kind of thing. It's the flesh is weak. Like, why do we put ourselves in those situations where we can fall foul to the temptation? Like, the spirit's so willing, but we put ourselves in compromising situations and our flesh is weak. Just avoid it altogether.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's absolutely right and true. And it links to what you were saying before as well about like just if something's causing you to sin, just cut it out. Like
Yeah.
I think that it's an interesting thing as Christians, right? Because on the one hand, we know that we are forgiven for not only our past sins but our future sins. But I think that some people then think that that means you can be complacent with your sin a little bit, and that is definitely not the case.
Yeah.
So very important point that we'll no doubt mention a few more times. All right, I'll go with 14, 51 and 52. I know you've got a similar sort of thought on this one, but or a question on it. But a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. This would have been very striking as this guy ran through town. And I just said perhaps it was a way of telling many what was happening to Jesus, right? Like, just, like everyone's going to talk about it, right? There's a naked guy just running through.
Yeah.
And I can't remember where it is exactly. And I don't even know if it was Old Testament or New Testament. But I remember one of my previous pastors did a really great story about these 7 Jewish guys running naked through the streets in the middle of the night after seeing something. I'm not sure if it was after Lazarus was raised or there was some big event and these guys just like ran out. And he said, just imagine seeing like 7 Jewish blokes just naked, just running through the town.
Yeah.
So I love a little bit of nudity in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my point was just like, why is this in here?
Yeah.
Like, for what point is this? I'd love to hear a sermon preached on this, because yeah, that's a great point that you brought out there, and I'm glad that you did. Like, just to the sort of sign of what's happening to Jesus and stuff. But like, that could have finished at verse 50 and probably would have been fine. I didn't need that section in there. But yeah, young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. Like,
love it.
yay, that made the Bible. But cool, why not?
Maybe there were some streakers that were not sure whether to believe this whole Jesus thing or not, and then they saw that and they're like, yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. So I think we've only got one point. We've got a couple of minutes, which is probably good because this is kind of like a strap in and listen, because this is kind of one of those big parts of the Bible, because it's saying in here in 14 verses sort of 61 through to 62, again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." And it's like, this is Jesus saying, I am this. I am this. It's not hearsay. It's not theoretical. It's I am. And it's one of those moments where you're like, either Jesus is who he says he was, or he's a complete liar, or he's insane and an absolute lunatic. And you can only really have him in one of those 3 camps. So if you don't believe that he was a complete lunatic, and you don't believe that he was just BSing his way through life, the only option is that he is who he says he was.
Right.
Is. And like, you have to then, like, I watched some of the Living Waters guy, I can't remember his name, and just the way he questions atheists and stuff like that and gets them to sort of come around to realizing actually maybe there is a God kind of thing. And it's exactly that. There aren't any alternatives here. You can be as stubborn and obstinate as you like, but the reality is Jesus is who he says he was, and we need to come into alignment with his preaching, his teaching.
Yeah, no, that's good, man. And it reminds me of some stuff that C.S. Lewis and others have said, right? If the resurrection isn't real, then Christians are to be pitied because they've believed a lie. But if the resurrection is true, if Jesus is who he says he was, which obviously we believe and there's good proof for, then Christianity is true and you need to fall in line the same as everyone else. Yeah, that's all we've got time for today. We're going to be finishing Mark tomorrow with Mark 15 and 16. So why don't you bloody beautiful people pick up your Bibles and get reading, eh? Do us a favour. Cheers. See you later.